bomb was already ticking when Elena Vale realized her husband had never truly seen her. Not during their wedding, not during 3 years of silent dinners and cold beds, not even tonight, as she stood beside him in a gown worth more than most people's lives, playing the role of the perfect mafia wife. Victor Caruso owned half of Chicago's underworld, but he'd never bothered to learn that the woman warming his arm could hotwire a car in 30 seconds, rebuild an engine blindfolded, or drive at speeds that made professional racers weep. He was about to find out. Before we dive into Elena's story of transformation from invisible trophy to unstoppable force, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin where everything shattered. Yeah, the Venetian ballroom dripped with old money and fresh blood. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors where Chicago's most dangerous men moved like sharks in expensive suits. Their women glittered beside them, diamonds at throats, silence on lips, beauty deployed as armor and weapon in equal measure. The annual Caruso Gala wasn't just a party. It was a demonstration of power, a census of loyalty, a reminder that Victor Caruso's empire stretched from the dockyards to the penthouse suites, from legitimate shipping companies to the kind of businesses that only operated after midnight. Elena Vale stood at her husband's side and felt absolutely nothing. The champagne in her hand had gone warm an hour ago. She hadn't taken a sip. Drinking required attention, and attention was a luxury she'd learned to ration carefully over 3 years of marriage to a man who looked at her the way people looked at expensive furniture, appreciating the aesthetic, noting the price tag, forgetting the object entirely the moment it left their line of sight. "Mrs. Caruso, you look exquisite tonight." Elena turned her practiced smile toward Anthony Marchetti, one of Victor's lieutenants. The man had kind eyes and killer's hands, a combination she'd learned was standard issue in her husband's world. "Thank you, Anthony. Your wife looks lovely as well." The exchange was choreographed, meaningless, identical to 50 other conversations she'd had tonight. Anthony's wife beamed. Anthony nodded and moved on. Elena returned her gaze to the middle distance, that carefully calibrated focal point that suggested engagement without requiring actual presence. Beside her, Victor laughed, the deep, commanding sound that made men straighten their spines and women touch their hair. He was holding court with 3 associates, discussing something about shipping routes and territorial agreements. Elena had learned to parse these conversations, to understand the coded language that turned business discussions into declarations of war or promises of alliance. She was fluent in violence by proxy now, even if no one bothered to test her comprehension. "Your wife is remarkably composed," someone was saying to Victor. Marco Santini, judging by the voice. One of the older captains, traditional in his views about women and power. "A real asset to your image. Stability personified." Elena felt Victor's hand settle on the small of her back. Not affection, but possession. A public gesture that said mine with all the warmth of a property deed. "Elena knows her role," Victor replied smoothly. "In our world, that's rarer than you'd think." The men chuckled. Elena's smile never wavered. Inside, something that had been sleeping for 3 years shifted position, not quite waking, but no longer entirely dormant either. "Quiet, beautiful. And she doesn't cause trouble," Marco continued, warming to his subject. "You married well, Victor. Some of these younger wives, they want to be involved, want opinions. But yours knows how to be decorative without being distracting." "Exactly." Well, Victor's thumb traced an absent pattern on her spine. He might as well have been petting a show dog. Elena understands that a powerful man needs a peaceful home. No drama, no complications. Just elegance and discretion. The sleeping thing inside Elena cracked one eye open. "Though I'll admit," Victor continued, his voice carrying that edge of casual cruelty that only emerged after his 3rd scotch, "sometimes I wonder if there's anything beneath the surface. Beautiful to look at, certainly, but Christ, the woman has no fire, no passion. It's like being married to a photograph." The men laughed again, that particular masculine sound that bonded them in their shared assessment of wives as objects rather than people. Elena stood perfectly still, her smile a masterwork of serene indifference, while inside her chest something ancient and furious finally opened both eyes and stretched. "Better boring than crazy." Marco offered philosophically. At least you can trust her not to embarrass you. True enough, Victor agreed. Elena's many things, but she's never been interesting. Never been interesting. The words settled into Elena's bones like shrapnel, small and sharp and impossible to extract. She continued smiling, continued standing, continued playing the role of the beautiful, boring, perfectly behaved wife. But something fundamental had just broken, a weight-bearing wall in the architecture of her self-control, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would never be able to repair it. The party continued around her. Victor moved on to other conversations, other demonstrations of power. He introduced her to visiting associates from New York and Los Angeles, men who assessed her the way they'd assess a painting or a car, admiring the lines, noting the value, moving on to more interesting topics. Their wives tried to engage her in conversation about charity galas and interior designers. Elena responded with the appropriate sounds, the correct facial expressions, while inside she was calculating. 3 years ago, she'd buried Elena Reyes to become Elena Caruso. Elena Reyes had been a ghost on the street racing circuit, not literally invisible, but close enough that the name Ghostline had stuck. She'd learned to drive in her father's garage, a Mexican immigrant who'd built a legitimate auto repair business in Chicago's industrial district through skill, sweat, and careful neutrality in gang territories. She'd learned to race when her father died and left her with a garage full of debt and a gift for machines that bordered on supernatural. She could hear an engine's problems before she opened the hood, could feel a car's balance through her fingertips on the steering wheel, could thread a vehicle through gaps that physics said shouldn't exist, while other racers were still processing that she'd moved. For 5 years, she'd ruled the underground circuits, made enough money from races and custom builds to pay off her father's debts, and then some. She'd been careful, professional, anonymous, racing under a helmet, taking her winnings in cash, never getting photographed or caught. The legend of Ghostline had grown while Elena Reyes remained a mystery. Then Victor Caruso had brought his car to her garage. She should have turned him away, should have recognized the danger in those dark eyes and expensive suit. But the car had been a vintage Maserati with a blown transmission, and she'd never been able to resist a beautiful machine in distress. He'd watched her work with an intensity that should have warned her, asked questions about her skill, her business, her life. She'd been honest, stupid in retrospect, telling him about her father, her gift for machines, her carefully maintained independence. 2 weeks later, his associates had made it clear that her garage sat in disputed territory. That protection would be necessary, that Victor Caruso himself had taken an interest in her situation and her well-being. She'd understood the trap immediately, had looked at her options with clear eyes, and found them all leading to the same conclusion: cooperate or lose everything her father had built. The marriage proposal had been presented as romance, but Elena had known it for what it was: acquisition. Victor wanted the legitimacy she provided, the image of a stable family man that played well with the older generation of crime lords. She wanted to keep her garage, maintain her independence, survive in a world that had suddenly become much more dangerous. She'd negotiated the prenup herself, making sure the garage stayed in her name, that she'd have financial security regardless of what happened. Then she'd buried Ghostline so deep that even she almost forgot the woman had existed. For 3 years, she'd been the perfect wife, learned to move through Victor's world without making waves, mastered the art of being present without being seen, decorative without being distracting. And for 3 years, something vital inside her had been dying by inches. Elena. She blinked, refocusing on Victor's face. He was looking at her with mild irritation, the expression he wore when she'd missed something obvious. Marco asked you a question. I apologize. Her voice was silk and smoke, carefully modulated. I was distracted by the music. It was a lie. The orchestra was playing something classical and forgettable, but it was the kind of lie that men like Marco expected from ornamental wives, so he smiled indulgently. I was just saying how lucky Victor is to have found a woman who lets him focus on important work without demanding his attention constantly. Yes, Elena agreed, her smile perfect and empty. Very lucky. Victor squeezed her waist, a gesture that probably looked affectionate from a distance. I'm going to the study with Marco and Anthony. Business. You'll be all right here? It wasn't really a question. Elena nodded, and Victor dropped his hand from her body like he was setting down a glass he'd finished using. She watched him walk away, broad shoulders, confident stride, the natural authority of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. Around her, the party continued. Women clustered in elegant groups, discussing nothing. Men moved in patterns of power and alliance, the real business of the evening happening in glances and handshakes rather than words. Elena stood alone in the center of the ballroom and felt the thing inside her chest spread its wings. Never been interesting. The words echoed in her skull like a challenge, like a dare, like the starting gun at a race she'd thought she'd finished running. She lasted another 20 minutes before the need to move became physically painful, made her excuses to the few people who bothered noticing she was leaving, moved through the mansion's corridors with the easy familiarity of someone who'd learned to navigate gilded cages. The garage was in the east wing, accessible through the kitchen and servants' quarters. Victor kept 12 cars there, ranging from classic Ferraris to modern Lamborghinis, each one a trophy in its own right. Elena had never touched them, had barely looked at them, had buried that part of herself so thoroughly that even being near these machines hadn't stirred the old hunger. Until tonight, the garage smelled like leather and motor oil and possibility. Elena stood in the doorway, her ridiculous heels clicking on concrete, her designer gown completely impractical for what she was suddenly, desperately considering. Victor's newest acquisition sat in the center bay like a sleeping predator. The Bugatti Chiron Supersport was matte black, angular, aggressive, a car built for one purpose and one purpose only: speed. Pure, uncompromising, almost violent speed. Victor had bought it 3 months ago, added it to his collection the way he added everything, because he could, because it demonstrated power, because owning beautiful things was part of his identity. Elena knew he'd driven it exactly once, from the dealer to the garage. The odometer probably read less than 50 miles. She walked toward it slowly, her heart rate climbing with each step. This was insane. This was career suicide in a world where divorce meant disappearing and disobedience meant worse. This was... Her hand touched the door handle. The metal was cool beneath her fingers, solid, real. The first real thing she'd touched in 3 years. Elena opened the door. The interior smelled new, barely broken in. The steering wheel sat waiting, leather-wrapped and perfectly balanced. She should walk away, should return to the party, to her role, to the safe numbness she'd cultivated so carefully. Instead, she gathered her ridiculous dress around her thighs and slid into the driver's seat. The world narrowed to this: her hands on the wheel, her feet finding the pedals, her breath coming faster as muscle memory older than her marriage woke up screaming. She reached for the ignition before remembering that Victor kept the keys in the study safe. Elena laughed, the sound sharp and slightly unhinged in the enclosed space. Then she bent down, reached under the steering column, and began to hotwire the car. Her fingers remembered the process her mind had tried to forget. Red wire to black, bypass the ignition system, apply pressure at exactly the right point. The Bugatti's security was sophisticated, but not sophisticated enough to stop someone who'd spent years building and rebuilding engines from their component parts. The engine caught with a roar that vibrated through her entire body. For 5 seconds, Elena sat frozen, the enormity of what she was doing settling over her like a shroud. Then she put the car in gear, pressed the accelerator, and drove straight through the garage door. The wood exploded outward in a spray of splinters and metal. Somewhere behind her she heard shouting, security guards probably, responding to the chaos. But the Bugatti was already accelerating down the circular driveway, already leaving the mansion behind. Elena hit the main road doing 70 and climbing. The city opened up before her like a promise. Chicago at night was neon and shadow, possibility and danger, everything she'd given up crystallized in the glow of streetlights and the rhythm of traffic. She drove through downtown, the Bugatti responding to her touch, like it had been waiting for someone who actually understood what it was built to do. Near the docks, in the industrial wasteland where legitimate business ended and underground business began, she found what she was looking for. The crowd was already gathering when she arrived. 200 people, maybe more, clustered around a makeshift starting line in a parking lot that had been abandoned by everyone except those who came here seeking the kind of rush that money couldn't buy and law couldn't provide. Street racing in Chicago wasn't a game. It was a religion, an economy, a parallel society that operated according to rules older and simpler than the ones that governed Victor's world. Here, power was measured in seconds and quarter miles. Respect was earned through skill, not inherited through violence. Elena parked the Bugatti at the edge of the lot and stepped out. The crowd noticed immediately. You couldn't drive a car worth $3 million into a street race and expect subtlety. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Someone whistled, low and appreciative. A woman approached, tall, black, with scars on her knuckles and a leather jacket that had seen more fights than Elena wanted to count. This was Jackie Chen, one of the race organizers, a legend in her own right who'd been running these events since before Elena had learned to drive. "Nice ride," Jackie said, her eyes assessing Elena with the same intensity she'd given the car. "You lost, Princess?" Elena met her gaze steadily. "I want to race." Jackie's eyebrows climbed. She glanced at Elena's designer dress, her styled hair, the diamond earrings that probably cost more than most of the cars present. "This isn't a charity gala. You know what happens here?" "I know. Entry fee is $10,000. Cash. You lose it all. You win, you take the pot. You crash, that's your problem. You die. We dump your body in the lake and forget you existed." Jackie tilted her head. "Still interested?" Elena reached into her clutch. Ridiculously, she'd grabbed it on the way out, some ingrained reflex of propriety, and pulled out a stack of hundreds. She'd taken the money from Victor's study safe months ago, insurance against a future that was suddenly arriving ahead of schedule. She counted out $10,000 and handed it to Jackie. The organizer's expression shifted from skeptical to intrigued. "You know how to drive that thing, or just how to buy it?" "I know how to drive." "What's your name?" For 3 years, Elena had been Mrs. Caruso, extension of her husband's identity and power. Before that, she'd been Ghostline, a legend without a face. She pulled off her diamond earrings and dropped them in Jackie's hand. "Collateral, and you can call me whatever you want after I win." Jackie's grin was sharp as broken glass. "I like you, Princess. You're either brave or stupid, and both make for good entertainment." She pocketed the earrings. "You're up against Mason. He drives the red Porsche GT2. He's fast, mean, and he doesn't break for anyone. You sure about this?" Elena looked across the lot to where a man in his 30s was leaning against a Porsche that looked like it had been built for one purpose: winning. He was surrounded by admirers, confidence radiating off him like heat. "I'm sure. Your funeral." Jackie raised her voice, addressing the crowd. "We got a new challenger. Mystery woman in the Bugatti versus Mason's Porsche, Route 7, docks to lakefront and back. First one to cross the finish wins the pot." The crowd erupted in cheers and catcalls. Money started changing hands as bets were placed. Elena walked back to the Bugatti, suddenly aware of how completely insane this was. She was Victor Caruso's wife. She was wearing a dress worth $20,000. She was about to race a car she'd stolen from her husband against a professional street racer while half of Chicago's underground watched. She slid into the driver's seat and felt nothing but alive. Mason pulled his Porsche up next to her, revving the engine in a display of aggressive masculinity. He glanced over, saw her through the window, and his expression shifted from competitive to condescending. He rolled down his window. Elena did the same. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" Mason called over the engine noise. "That's a lot of car for someone who probably learned to drive in a parking lot." Elena didn't respond. She was checking the Bugatti's systems, feeling the engine's rhythm through the steering wheel, calculating weight distribution and acceleration curves. "Tell you what," Mason continued, his grin predatory. "When I win, you give me your number. When you inevitably crash, I'll come pick you up and show you how a real driver handles things." Elena looked at him then, really looked at him, and let him see exactly nothing in her eyes. "When I win," she said quietly, "you shut the fuck up." His grin faltered. Jackie appeared between the cars, holding a flashlight. "Rules are simple. First to the lakefront marker and back wins. You stay on Route 7, you don't hit civilians, you don't cause property damage that'll bring cops. Everything else is fair game. Questions?" Both drivers shook their heads. Jackie stepped back, raised the flashlight. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1. The light flashed. Elena launched. The Bugatti's acceleration was violence incarnate, 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds, the kind of force that shoved you back in your seat and reminded you that physics was just a suggestion this machine had learned to ignore. She felt the tires bite asphalt, felt the engine's power translate into forward momentum, felt every buried instinct wake up screaming. Beside her, Mason's Porsche launched with equal aggression. For 5 seconds, they were parallel, engines screaming, both cars clawing for advantage. Then Elena shifted. The Bugatti surged forward like it had been waiting for permission, and suddenly she was pulling ahead. 1 car length, 2. Mason tried to close the gap, his Porsche's engine redlining, but Elena was already calculating the first turn. A sharp right that would separate drivers who understood racing from drivers who just understood speed. She braked late, turned hard, felt the Bugatti's weight distribution shift as she threaded through the corner at a speed that would have terrified anyone who hadn't grown up doing this. The tires screamed. The car held. Behind her, she heard Mason's Porsche brake earlier, turn wider, lose precious seconds. The docks blurred past in shadows and streetlight. Elena wove through the route with precision that came from somewhere deeper than thought, muscle memory, spatial awareness, the kind of knowledge that lived in your bones and nerves rather than your conscious mind. She'd never driven this exact route before, but she understood the language of speed and space and risk well enough to translate on the fly. The lakefront marker was a light pole Jackie's people had marked with orange paint. Elena saw it approaching, calculated her turn, didn't slow down. She whipped the Bugatti around in a drift that would have made professional racers weep with envy, the back end sliding out in a controlled chaos that looked reckless and was actually the result of dozens of micro-adjustments happening faster than thought. She completed the turn and accelerated back toward the starting line. Mason was still approaching the marker. Elena flew past him going the opposite direction, and in the split second their cars passed each other, she saw his expression shift from confidence to shock to rage. The finish line was ahead. Jackie, standing with her flashlight, the crowd pressed close, phones out recording this beautiful destruction. Elena crossed first by a margin that wasn't even close. She braked hard, the Bugatti sliding to a stop that sent spectators scattering. For a moment she just sat there, hands on the wheel, heart hammering against her ribs, feeling more alive than she'd felt in 3 years. Then she opened the door and stepped out. The crowd erupted. People were shouting, cheering. Someone was screaming about how they'd just made $5,000 on a bet. Jackie was pushing through the chaos, her expression somewhere between impressed and suspicious. "Who the hell are you?" Jackie demanded when she reached Elena. Behind them, Mason's Porsche limped to a stop. The driver got out, his face dark with humiliation and fury. Elena pulled off her heels, standing barefoot on concrete that was probably filthy, wearing a dress that was now completely ruined, feeling like she'd just remembered how to breathe. "I'm nobody," she said. Then she paused, considering. "Actually, you can call me Ghostline." The reaction was immediate and electric. Ghostline was a legend, a myth, someone who dominated the circuits 5 years ago and then vanished so completely that half the racing community thought she'd been a collective hallucination. Elena had been careful to never race unmasked, to never give anyone a clean photo, to remain a mystery that grew more elaborate with each retelling. Jackie's eyes widened. Bullshit! The Ghostline raced a modified Skyline with custom suspension, someone in the crowd called out. Never showed her face, never lost a race in 3 years. I was there when she beat Marco Rodriguez, another voice added. He drove off the fucking pier trying to keep up with her. Ghostline didn't even slow down. Elena met Jackie's gaze steadily. I had reasons to disappear. Tonight, I had reasons to come back. Prove it, Jackie said. Elena walked to the Bugatti's rear bumper, crouched down, and removed a small panel that most people wouldn't even know existed. Inside was the car's computer system. She pulled out her phone, opened an app that she'd coded herself years ago, and jacked into the system. 30 seconds later, the Bugatti's performance display lit up, showing acceleration curves, braking data, cornering G-forces, all the telemetry from the race she'd just run. Ghostline was a mechanic before she was a racer, Elena said, standing up. She could rebuild an engine in 6 hours and hotwire a car in 30 seconds. She understood machines better than people. She gestured to the display. These numbers don't lie. I hit every corner at maximum sustainable speed without traction control. I shifted at optimal RPM without looking at the tachometer. And I drove a car I've never sat in before, like I built it myself. Jackie stared at the data, then at Elena, then back at the data. Holy shit, she breathed. It's really you. The crowd pressed closer. everyone wanting to see, to touch, to confirm that a legend had just materialized in their parking lot wearing designer heels and diamonds. Mason shoved through the crowd, his face twisted with anger. I don't care who she claims to be. She cheated. Nobody drives like that in a street race. She had to have what? Elena turned to face him, and something in her expression made him stop talking. Had to have skill you don't possess? Had to understand racing at a level you'll never reach? Had to be better than you? His hands clenched into fists. For a second, Elena thought he might actually try to hit her. She found herself hoping he would. She was tired of men underestimating her, tired of being silent, tired of pretending she was less than she was. Jackie stepped between them. Stand down, Mason. She beat you fair. Take your loss like a man instead of a child. This is bullshit. This is done. Jackie's voice could have cut steel. You got beat by a legend. Congratulations. Now get out of my race before I have you removed. Mason looked like he wanted to argue. Then he saw the crowd's expressions, the lack of sympathy, the growing annoyance that he was ruining their moment, and stalked back to his Porsche. Elena watched him go, feeling nothing. She'd just stolen her husband's car, revealed her secret identity, and won $20,000 in a street race. Mason's ego was the least of her concerns. Jackie handed her a thick envelope. Your winnings, plus your earrings. The diamonds clinked as they landed in Elena's palm. That was the most beautiful driving I've seen in 5 years. Where have you been? In a cage. Elena looked down at the money, the earrings, the evidence of a life she'd tried to bury, pretending to be someone I'm not. And now? Now I'm done pretending. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Elena knew she should be afraid, should be planning her escape, her explanation, her survival strategy for when Victor found out what she'd done. Instead, she felt light, untethered, dangerous. She pulled on her heels, holding her winnings and her diamonds, and walked back to the Bugatti. Wait, Jackie followed her. You're leaving? Just like that? I have to return this before he notices it's gone. He? Elena smiled, sharp and terrible. My husband. She slid into the driver's seat, fired up the engine, and disappeared into Chicago's neon darkness before Jackie could ask any more questions. The drive back to the mansion should have sobered her, should have reminded her of consequences, of the life she was risking, of everything she stood to lose. Instead, Elena drove with her windows down and her hair whipping wild, feeling like she'd just escaped drowning. She parked the Bugatti in the garage, or what remained of it, given the destroyed door, and sat in the darkness, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Never been interesting, Victor had said. Elena laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. She'd just announced to Chicago's underground that Ghostline was back. She'd beaten one of the circuit's best drivers in front of 200 witnesses. She'd stolen her husband's car and crashed through his garage like a wrecking ball through careful plans. Tomorrow, Victor would find out. Tomorrow, there would be consequences. Tomorrow, the careful architecture of her survival strategy would come crashing down around her ears. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Elena Vale felt like herself. She stepped out of the car, leaving the keys in the ignition, and walked back toward the mansion. Somewhere above her, the party was still going. Music and laughter and men making deals that would shape the criminal landscape of an entire city. Elena slipped through the servants' entrance, moved through corridors she knew by heart, and returned to the ballroom where everyone was too drunk and too important to have noticed she'd been gone. Victor was holding court near the bar, his third scotch in hand, his expression animated as he told some story that had his audience laughing. He didn't even glance her direction as she resumed her position at the edge of the room. The perfect wife, the silent trophy, the beautiful, boring woman who knew her place. Elena stood among the glittering crowd and felt the future bearing down on her like an oncoming collision. She couldn't wait for the impact. The party ended at 2 a.m, and Elena survived it the way she'd survived everything else in her marriage, by becoming invisible. She stood. She smiled. She made appropriate sounds when spoken to, and beneath the surface she cataloged every second of the night with the precision of someone counting down to detonation. The champagne she hadn't touched, the conversation she'd pretended to follow. The moment Victor's hand had settled on her back like she was furniture, he wanted to ensure remained properly positioned. Never been interesting. The words had burrowed into her brain and taken root, growing thorns. By the time the last guests stumbled toward their town cars and private drivers, Elena's face ached from smiling. Victor was drunk. Not falling down drunk, but loose enough that his edges blurred, his control slipped. He draped his arm across her shoulders as they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, his weight heavy and presumptuous. "Good party," he announced to no one in particular. Marchetti seemed pleased with the new arrangement. "Did you see Romano's face when I mentioned the dockyard expansion? Priceless." Elena made a non-committal sound. They reached the bedroom, a space decorated in creams and golds that looked like a hotel suite and felt like a museum. Expensive, impersonal, empty. "You were perfect tonight," Victor continued, releasing her to loosen his tie. "Exactly what I needed. Beautiful, quiet, no drama." He shrugged out of his jacket. "That's the thing about you, Elena. You never make waves, never demand attention. It's refreshing, honestly. After my first wife and all her theatrics, you're like a vacation." He meant it as a compliment. Elena could hear the approval in his voice, the genuine satisfaction that his second wife had learned to be everything his first hadn't, compliant, decorative, forgettable. She stood in the center of the bedroom and felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. "I'm going to shower," Victor said, already moving toward the bathroom. "Don't wait up. I'll probably fall asleep as soon as I hit the bed." The door closed behind him. Water started running. Elena looked at her reflection in the floor-length mirror. Designer gown, styled hair, perfect makeup, concealing a woman who'd stopped existing 3 years ago. Then she grabbed her phone from the nightstand and pulled up the encrypted browser she'd installed months ago. The underground racing forums were already exploding. Ghostline is back. She saw it everywhere, spreading like wildfire across message boards and social media channels that existed in the spaces between legal and lawful. Someone had recorded her race against Mason. The video was grainy, shot from a phone camera, but clear enough to show the Bugatti launching like a missile, clear enough to capture the moment she drifted around the lakefront marker with the kind of precision that couldn't be faked. The comments were a mix of disbelief, excitement, and speculation. "No fucking way, that's really Ghostline. Did you see that drift? That's her signature move. I thought she was dead. I thought she was a myth. Where has she been for 5 years? Who cares? She's back and she's driving a goddamn Bugatti now." Elena scrolled through the chaos, watching her legend resurrect itself in real time. Someone had already created a poll asking who would win in a rematch between Ghostline and Chicago's current top 5 racers. She was leading by a landslide. Jackie Chan had posted a single comment that was getting thousands of likes. "Saw her drive tonight. It's really her, and she's faster than before." Elena's phone buzzed with a direct message. "Jackie, we need to talk tomorrow night. Same place. Don't make me hunt you down." She should ignore it. Should delete the browser, destroy the phone, pretend tonight had never happened. Tomorrow she could wake up and resume being Mrs. Victor Caruso, beautiful and boring and safe. Elena typed back, "I'll be there." She deleted the browser history, powered down the phone, and changed out of her gown. By the time Victor emerged from the shower, she was in bed with the lights off, pretending to sleep while her heart raced with plans she had no business making. He climbed in beside her without a word, his breathing evening out within minutes. Elena lay in the darkness and stared at the ceiling, listening to her husband's sleep and knowing that everything was about to change. She just hadn't realized how quickly it would happen. Morning arrived with sunlight and catastrophe. Elena woke to raised voices downstairs, Victor's, followed by several others she recognized as his security team. She pulled on a robe and descended the stairs, her stomach knotting with the sick certainty that someone had found the Bugatti, noticed the destroyed garage door, put together a timeline that ended with her. But when she entered the dining room, Victor wasn't looking at her with suspicion. He was staring at his phone with an expression that cycled between confusion and fury. "What's wrong?" Elena asked, her voice still sleep-soft. Victor looked up. "Someone stole my Bugatti last night." Elena's heart stopped. She forced her face into careful concern. "What?" "During the party, someone drove it straight through the garage door." He gestured toward the windows that overlooked the east wing. Even from here, she could see security personnel examining the wreckage. They brought it back, apparently, parked it like nothing happened, but someone took it. "That's..." Elena searched for appropriate words. "Insane! Who would be that bold?" That's what I'm trying to figure out. Victor's jaw was tight. Whoever it was knew how to bypass the security system, knew which car to take, and had the skill to actually drive it, which narrows things down considerably. He looked at his phone again, and apparently they took it to an illegal street race at the docks. Elena's blood ran cold. How do you know that? Because it's all over the underground forums this morning. Victor turned his phone to show her the video, grainy, dark, but unmistakably showing his Bugatti launching off the starting line. Someone raced my car against Mason Torres and beat him by 15 seconds. The whole circuit is talking about it. Elena moved closer, examining the video with what she hoped looked like curiosity rather than recognition. She could see herself in the driver's seat if she looked closely, but the darkness and angle made identification difficult. Can you see who's driving? No, but whoever it is, they're good. Really good. Victor replayed the video, watching the way the Bugatti cornered. The way they handle that car. It's professional level. Someone with serious training. Marco Santini entered the dining room, his expression grim. We've reviewed the security footage from last night. The garage camera was disabled around 11:30. Someone who knew our system. Inside job? Victor's voice could have frozen nitrogen. Possibly, or someone with access to our security protocols. Marco hesitated. There's something else. The thief left fingerprints on the steering wheel. We're running them now. Elena's chest tightened. She'd been too caught up in the moment to think about fingerprints, too high on adrenaline to remember basic operational security. Of course, Victor would have his car printed. Of course, he'd want to know who dared to touch his property. Good, Victor said. I want to know who had the balls to steal from me, and then I want to make an example of them that the whole city will remember. Elena excused herself, claiming she needed coffee, and retreated to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking as she filled a cup. She had maybe hours before the fingerprints came back. Hours before Victor learned that his boring, obedient wife was the legendary street racer who'd stolen his car and humiliated him in front of the entire underground. She needed to run. Should have run the moment she'd parked the Bugatti. Should have taken her winnings from the race, grabbed her passport, and disappeared before dawn. But something in her refused to flee. Some stubborn, reckless part that was tired of hiding, tired of being small, tired of pretending she was less than she was just to survive in a world built by men like Victor. If he was going to find out, she'd face it standing up. Elena returned to the dining room with her coffee and sat down at the table like this was a normal morning, like her entire life wasn't balanced on the edge of discovery. Victor was on the phone now, barking orders at someone about expanding the search for the thief. Marco stood by the window watching the security team work. Neither of them looked at Elena. Neither of them considered for even a second that the silent, decorative wife might be capable of grand theft auto. The irony was almost funny. Hours crawled past. Victor spent the morning in his study, making calls and holding meetings about the Bugatti incident. Elena moved through the house like a ghost, waiting for the hammer to fall. It came at 3 in the afternoon. She was in the library, pretending to read, when Marco appeared in the doorway. His expression was strange, shock mixed with something that might have been reluctant respect. Mrs. Caruso, Victor wants to see you in his study. Elena set down her book. Of course. She followed Marco through corridors that suddenly felt like a walk to execution. Her mind raced through possible strategies: denial, deflection, confession. None of them ended well. Victor's study was all dark wood and leather, the aesthetic of power consolidated. He stood behind his desk, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him, the wall-mounted monitor displayed the fingerprint analysis results. Her fingerprints, clear as day, matched to the DMV records from when she'd gotten her driver's license 10 years ago. Victor looked at her for a long moment. Close the door, Elena. She did. Marco remained outside. Whatever was about to happen, Victor wanted it private. The fingerprints came back, Victor said conversationally. Would you like to guess whose they are? Elena met his gaze. Mine. His eyebrows climbed. He'd expected denial, clearly. Expected her to lie, to play dumb, to act confused. The direct admission seemed to throw him. You stole my car. I did. Drove it to an illegal street race. Yes. Beat Mason Torres, who's one of the best drivers in the underground circuit. He wasn't that good. Victor stared at her. Elena watched him trying to reconcile the woman standing before him with the woman he'd described last night as boring, passionless, lifeless. Why? He finally asked. Elena set down her coffee cup carefully. I heard what you said last night, to Marco and the others, about how I'm decorative but not distracting, beautiful but boring, how you wonder if there's anything beneath the surface. Victor's expression shifted, realization dawning that she'd overheard his private conversation. I wanted you to know, Elena continued, her voice steady, that there's quite a lot beneath the surface. You just never bothered to look. So you committed grand theft auto to prove a point. I committed grand theft auto because I was tired of being invisible. Elena moved closer to the desk. For 3 years, I've played the perfect wife, stood silent at your parties, smiled at your associates, made myself small and quiet and forgettable because that's what you wanted. That's what you needed to feel powerful. Elena, but before I was your wife, I was Ghostline. She watched his face as she said the name, saw the moment it registered. Everyone in Chicago's underworld knew Ghostline, the legendary racer who'd never lost, never showed her face, never got caught. I ruled the street racing circuit for 3 years, made more money from races than most people see in a lifetime, built custom cars that collectors would kill to own, and I buried all of it to marry you. Victor leaned against his desk. Ghostline is a myth. Ghostline is standing in your study telling you that your security system is laughably easy to bypass and your Bugatti handles well, but the suspension could use adjustment. For several seconds, Victor said nothing. Elena could see him processing, recalibrating, trying to fit this new information into his understanding of who she was. The racing forums are exploding, he said finally. Everyone's talking about how Ghostline came back after 5 years and beat Mason Torres in a car she'd never driven before. 15 seconds, Elena corrected. I beat him by 15 seconds. It would have been more, but I was wearing heels and a gown that cost more than his car. Victor laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. My wife is a street racing legend. Your wife is a lot of things you never bothered to discover. He moved around the desk, studying her with new eyes. Why did you come back? You could have taken the car and kept going, could have disappeared before the fingerprints came back. Because I'm done running, done hiding, done pretending to be someone I'm not just to fit into your world. Elena held his gaze. You wanted stability and decoration. I gave you 3 years of it, but I'm not doing it anymore. And what do you think happens now? Victor's voice was soft, dangerous. You've embarrassed me, stolen from me, revealed yourself as someone completely different from who I thought I married. In my world, that has consequences. Then give me consequences. Elena stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Divorce me. Throw me out. Do whatever you think will restore your reputation. But don't expect me to apologize for reminding you that I'm a person, not a possession. The air between them crackled with tension. Anger, yes, but also something else. Something that felt like recognition, like Victor was seeing her for the first time and not quite sure what to do with the revelation. I could have you killed for this, he said quietly. You could try. Elena's smile was sharp. But I'm faster than your men, smarter than your security system, and apparently much more interesting than you thought. So maybe reconsider the threats and try an actual conversation instead. Victor studied her for another long moment. Then unexpectedly, he laughed, real laughter this time, the kind that came from genuine surprise. You're insane, he said. No, I'm done being bored, done being... He shook his head, still looking at her like she was a puzzle he just realized had more pieces than he'd originally counted. 3 years. I've been married to you for 3 years, and I had no idea. I know, that was the point. Elena moved to the window, looking out at the grounds that had felt like a prison since her wedding day. You wanted a wife who wouldn't make waves, who'd smile and stand silent and never cause problems. I gave you exactly what you asked for. Until last night. Until last night, she agreed. Victor joined her at the window. The underground is going crazy. Everyone wants to know where Ghostline's been, why she came back, whether she'll race again. And what are you going to tell them? That depends. He looked at her sideways. Are you going to race again? Elena considered the question. 24 hours ago, she would have said no, would have insisted that Ghostline was buried, that her racing days were over, that she'd chosen this life and had to live with the consequences. But standing in Victor's study, having just confessed to stealing his car and beating one of Chicago's best drivers, Elena found she had no interest in lying anymore. Yes, she said simply, I'm going to race again. Victor was quiet for a moment. That could complicate things. Things are already complicated. True. He turned to face her fully. You realize this changes everything between us. Good. Everything between us needed to change. He studied her face, and Elena met his gaze without flinching. Let him see the woman she'd hidden for 3 years. Let him see the fire he'd complained was missing. I don't know what to do with you, Victor admitted. You could start by treating me like an equal instead of a trophy. You stole my car. You called me boring. You crashed through my garage door. You told your friends I wasn't interesting. Victor's lips twitched. Are we really going to scorekeep this argument? Are you really going to pretend you didn't deserve it? They stared at each other, and something shifted in the air between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement, recognition. The beginning of something that looked less like a marriage of convenience and more like an actual relationship between two people who'd finally stopped performing for each other. Jackie Chen wants to meet with me tonight, Elena said. At the docks. She's organizing a race and wants Ghostline to participate. Victor's expression hardened. Absolutely not. I wasn't asking permission. Elena, you can't just... Can't what? Make my own decisions? Choose how I spend my time, live my life. She crossed her arms. You don't own me, Victor. You married me. There's a difference. In my world, in your world, women are decorative and silent. I know. I've spent 3 years living in your world. Elena's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Maybe it's time your world adjusted. Victor opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. You're really going to that race. I am. Even though it could expose you, could put you in danger, could make me feel alive again? Yes, I'm going. Elena headed for the door. You can try to stop me, but we both know how well that worked out last time. She left him standing in his study, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't wait for his permission or his dismissal. Night fell over Chicago like a curtain, and Elena prepared for battle. She showered, changed into jeans and a leather jacket she'd kept hidden in the back of her closet, relics from her old life that she'd been unable to throw away. Her hair went into a practical ponytail. Her makeup stayed minimal. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, which was perfect. She was tired of recognizing herself as Victor's wife. She was ready to remember who she'd been before. The Bugatti was out of the question, too recognizable now, too connected to last night's chaos. Instead, Elena took one of the other cars from Victor's collection, a black Mercedes AMG that was fast enough to be useful but common enough to be unremarkable. She expected resistance when she reached the garage, expected Victor to have posted guards, to have locked down the cars, to have made some move to control her. Instead, she found Marco waiting by the Mercedes, holding the keys. Mrs. Caruso, he said neutrally. Elena stopped. Marco. He tossed her the keys. Victor says to bring the car back in one piece, and to try not to get yourself killed. She caught the keys, surprised. He's letting me go? He said, and I quote, if I try to cage her, she'll just hotwire something else and crash through another door. Marco's expression was carefully blank. He's not happy about it, but he's also smart enough to know when he's lost an argument. Elena processed this. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't make him regret this. Marco opened the driver's door for her. And Mrs. Caruso? I saw the video from last night. That was some impressive driving. She slid into the seat, fired up the engine. You haven't seen anything yet. The docks were more crowded than last night. Word had spread that Ghostline might appear again, and apparently half the city's underground wanted to witness it. Elena parked the Mercedes and walked toward the gathering, feeling eyes track her movement. Jackie appeared immediately, her expression knowing. Wasn't sure you'd show. I said I would. Yeah, but people say lots of things. Jackie gestured toward the crowd. Come on, we need to talk before the circus gets started. She led Elena away from the main gathering, toward a warehouse that overlooked the water. Inside, away from watching eyes and recording phones, Jackie turned to face her. I did some digging after you left last night, Jackie said. Ghostline disappeared 5 years ago. Around the same time, a mechanic named Elena Reyes sold her garage and vanished from the circuit. Then, 6 months later, a woman named Elena Caruso appeared at Victor Caruso's side wearing a wedding ring. Elena said nothing. You married into the mob, Jackie continued. Gave up racing, gave up everything, and became Mrs. Crime Boss. That about cover it? More or less. Why? It was the same question Victor had asked. Elena was getting tired of answering it. Survival, protection, the usual reasons people make deals with devils. Jackie nodded slowly. And now you're back because I got tired of being dead while I was still breathing. Fair enough. Jackie pulled out her phone, showed Elena a racing bracket. I'm organizing a tournament, 5 rounds, elimination style. Winner takes $50,000 and the title of best driver in Chicago. Elena examined the bracket. 12 drivers, some of whose names she recognized from her old racing days. Mason's in this. Of course he is. He wants a rematch. Wants to prove last night was a fluke. It wasn't. I know that. You know that. But Mason's ego requires proof. Jackie put away her phone. The question is whether you're ready for this. Tournament racing is different from one-off races. It's sustained performance, multiple opponents, no room for error. I can handle it. Even with your husband knowing who you are? Knowing where you'll be? Elena smiled. Especially with my husband knowing. He doesn't own me, Jackie. He never did. Jackie studied her for a long moment, then grinned. God, I've missed you. The circuit's been boring without Ghostline. They returned to the crowd together. The moment people saw Elena, conversation stopped. Phones came out. Someone started cheering, and the sound spread like wildfire. Mason was there, leaning against his Porsche, his expression dark when he saw her approach. Came back for more humiliation? Elena asked pleasantly. His jaw tightened. Last night was luck. Tonight will be different. You keep telling yourself that. Jackie raised her voice, addressing the crowd. First round matchups are posted. Drivers, get to your cars. We start in 10 minutes. The crowd surged toward the starting area. Elena walked back to the Mercedes, her heart rate climbing with anticipation rather than fear. This was who she was. Not Victor's wife, not his trophy, but a driver, a racer, someone who understood speed and risk and the beautiful mathematics of controlled chaos. She slid into the driver's seat and felt complete. The first race was almost too easy. Her opponent drove aggressively but predictably, taking corners too wide and braking too early. Elena won by 8 seconds. The second race was closer. Her opponent was a woman in her 40s who drove a modified Nissan with the kind of precision that came from decades of practice. But Elena had something more than practice. She had instinct, that ineffable quality that separated good drivers from legends. She won by 3 seconds. By the time the third round started, the crowd was chanting Ghostline's name. Elena stood beside the Mercedes, waiting for the announcement of her next opponent, when she felt someone watching her. She turned and found Victor standing at the edge of the crowd, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the chaos and noise. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then Jackie was calling for drivers, and Elena had to focus on the race ahead. Her opponent was Mason. Of course it was. They pulled their cars up to the starting line, engines growling. Mason glared at her through the window, his ego bruised and his determination absolute. Elena ignored him. She was done with men who thought anger made them dangerous. She'd married one. She'd buried herself for one. She wasn't going to lose a race to one. Jackie raised the flashlight. 3, 2, 1. The light flashed. Elena launched the Mercedes like she was launching herself out of the past 3 years, and beside her, Mason fought to keep up with a woman who'd already left him behind. The Mercedes and the Porsche launched in perfect synchronization, 2 predators exploding off the line with the kind of violence that made the crowd step back instinctively. Elena felt the acceleration push her into the seat, felt the engine respond to her touch like it had been waiting for someone who understood its language. Beside her, Mason's Porsche kept pace for exactly 4 seconds before she shifted and left him scrambling. The route was different tonight. Jackie had mapped a course through the industrial district that included tighter corners, narrower spaces, obstacles that would separate drivers who merely had speed from drivers who had control. Elena threaded through the first turn without touching the brakes, the Mercedes responding to micro-adjustments of the wheel that happened faster than conscious thought. Behind her, she heard Mason's tires screech as he took the corner too hot and had to correct. She was already 3 car lengths ahead. The docks blurred past in shadows and sodium light. Elena's world narrowed to the road ahead, the engine's rhythm, the perfect balance between acceleration and control that lived somewhere in the space between recklessness and precision. This was mathematics made visceral, physics transformed into poetry, every calculation happening in her nerve endings rather than her conscious mind. Mason was good. She'd give him that. He knew these streets, knew his car, knew how to push limits without crossing into disaster. But Elena wasn't just good. She was Ghostline, and Ghostline didn't lose. The halfway point was a warehouse marked with orange paint. Elena hit it doing 90, drifted through the turn with the kind of casual mastery that made experienced drivers weep, and accelerated back toward the finish line, while Mason was still approaching the marker. She crossed first by 12 seconds. The crowd erupted as she braked to a stop, their cheers echoing off warehouse walls and water. Elena sat in the Mercedes for a moment, hands still on the wheel, feeling the engine's heat through the floorboards and the adrenaline singing in her veins like electricity. When she stepped out, Mason was already there, his face twisted with fury. "You cheated!" he spat. Elena closed the car door gently. "How exactly?" "I don't know, but nobody drives like that without an advantage. Modified engine, illegal equipment, something." Jackie appeared between them, her expression annoyed. "Mason, we inspect every car before races, you know that. Her Mercedes is stock. She's just better than you." "That's impossible." "No," Elena said quietly. "What's impossible is your ego accepting that a woman can outrace you without cheating. But here we are." Mason's hands clenched into fists. For a second, Elena thought he might actually swing. She found herself hoping he would. She'd spent 3 years swallowing anger and resentment. She was ready to let some of it out. But Jackie stepped fully between them, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "You throw a punch at her, Mason, and I'll ban you from every race in this city. Try me." He stared at Jackie, then at Elena, then stalked back to his Porsche without another word. Elena watched him go and felt nothing but relief that she'd never have to be married to someone like that. Then she remembered she was married to someone infinitely more dangerous, and turned to find Victor still watching from the edge of the crowd. He started walking toward her. The crowd parted automatically, the way people always parted for men like Victor Caruso. He moved with the casual authority of someone who'd never been told no in his life, his expensive suit completely out of place among the leather jackets and street clothes, but somehow making everyone else look underdressed. He stopped in front of Elena. "That was impressive." "Thank you." "Also reckless, dangerous, and likely to get you killed if you keep doing it." "Probably." Victor's jaw tightened. "You're enjoying this. Making me worry. Making me chase you." "I'm not making you do anything," Elena said. "You chose to come here. You chose to watch. Just like I chose to race." Jackie materialized beside them, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Caruso, didn't expect to see you at one of my events. I came to make sure my wife didn't get herself killed showing off." "Your wife just won 3 races in a row against some of the best drivers in Chicago," Jackie countered. "She doesn't need your protection. She needs you to get out of her way." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Jackie crossed her arms. "Elena, Ghostline, is a legend in this world. Has been since before you married her. The question is whether you're going to support that or try to cage it." For a long moment, Victor said nothing. Elena could see him processing, calculating, trying to figure out how to maintain control in a situation that was rapidly escaping his authority. Finally, he looked at Elena. "How many more races tonight?" "2, she said. "Semifinals and finals." "And you're going to race them regardless of what I say?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "Then I'm staying to watch. And afterwards, we're going to have a conversation about boundaries and risk management." "Looking forward to it," Elena said, meaning it. Victor moved to the edge of the crowd, and Elena returned her focus to the tournament. The semifinals were announced, and her opponent turned out to be a driver she recognized from her old days, Carlos Rivera, a professional who'd been racing longer than Elena had been alive. He approached her before the race, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "Ghostline, heard you were back. Thought it might be bullshit." "Not bullshit," Elena confirmed. "Good. I've been waiting 5 years for a rematch. You beat me in the season finals back in 2020. Barely slept for a month after that." Elena remembered. Carlos had been the toughest competition she'd ever faced, a driver who combined experience with innovation in ways that had pushed her to her absolute limits. "You gave me a hell of a race. And tonight I'm going to give you another one." His grin widened. "No hard feelings when I win?" "None. But you're not going to win." "We'll see." The race was everything Elena had hoped for. Carlos drove like a man possessed, taking risks that bordered on suicidal and somehow making them work. He knew every trick, every shortcut, every psychological game that could make an opponent hesitate or second guess. But Elena had spent 3 years learning to survive in a world built on psychological warfare. Carlos's mind games were nothing compared to navigating Victor's empire. She won by 5 seconds, and when she stepped out of the Mercedes, Carlos was laughing. "Damn," he said, shaking his head. "You got better. Didn't think that was possible." "I had a lot of time to think about driving while I wasn't allowed to do it," Elena replied. "Well, whoever wins the other semifinal is going to have their hands full with you in the finals." Carlos offered his hand. "Good race, Ghostline." She shook it. "Good race." The other semifinal was between a driver named Sarah Chen, no relation to Jackie, and a young hotshot who couldn't have been more than 22. Sarah won handily, and when the finals were announced, Elena found herself facing off against a woman who'd been racing professionally since Elena was in high school. They met at the starting line as the crowd pressed close, phones out, everyone wanting to capture what was being called the race of the decade. Sarah rolled down her window. Elena did the same. "I've heard stories about you," Sarah said. "Everyone has. The driver who never lost. The ghost who vanished. And now I'm back." "Why? You clearly didn't need the money if you married into the Caruso family. So what's this about?" Elena considered the question. "It's about remembering who I am when nobody's watching." Sarah nodded slowly. "I can respect that. Doesn't mean I'm going to let you win." "I wouldn't want you to." Jackie appeared with her flashlight, her face flushed with excitement. This was the race she'd been building toward, the matchup that would define her tournament and possibly resurrect the underground racing scene that had been dying slowly for years. "Final race," Jackie's voice carried over the crowd. "Ghostline versus Sarah Chen. Winner takes $50,000 and the title of best driver in Chicago. Drivers ready?" Both women nodded. "Then let's make history. 3, 2, 1. The flashlight flashed, and Elena launched the Mercedes into the night. Sarah was everything Carlos had been, and more. Experienced, tactical, absolutely fearless. She took corners that Elena had been planning to dominate, and somehow found lines through them that were even faster. She braked later, accelerated harder, drove with the kind of precision that only came from decades of practice. For the first time in 5 years, Elena found herself in a race she might actually lose. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She pushed the Mercedes harder than she'd pushed any car since her racing days, finding limits she'd forgotten existed. The route blurred into pure sensation, speed and sound, and the constant calculation of risk versus reward that happened somewhere deeper than thought. They hit the halfway marker within a second of each other, both cars drifting through the turn in perfect synchronization. The crowd watching from various vantage points along the route went wild, their cheers audible even over the engine noise. Elena came out of the drift half a car length ahead. It wasn't much, but it was something. She used it, accelerating through a straightaway that Sarah had probably assumed would let her close the gap. Instead, Elena pulled further ahead, the Mercedes responding to her touch like it had been built specifically for this moment. The finish line appeared ahead. Elena crossed it 3 seconds before Sarah, and the world exploded into chaos. People were screaming, cheering, rushing toward the Mercedes as Elena braked to a stop. She sat in the driver's seat, hands trembling now that the race was over, her entire body vibrating with exhaustion and triumph and the pure, uncomplicated joy of having done something she was brilliant at. When she finally stepped out, Sarah was there, grinning. "Hell of a race," Sarah said, offering her hand. Elena shook it. "You almost had me in that third turn." "Almost doesn't count in racing." Sarah's grin widened. "But I'll take the compliment. You're everything they said you were, Ghostline. It was an honor getting beat by you." Jackie pushed through the crowd carrying an envelope thick with cash and a trophy that looked like it had been welded together from car parts. "Congratulations, Ghostline. $50,000 and the title of Chicago's best driver. How does it feel?" Elena took the envelope and the trophy, their weight solid and real in her hands. "It feels like remembering how to breathe." The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to touch her, congratulate her, ask when she'd race again. Elena fielded questions and accepted praise, and somewhere in the chaos she caught sight of Victor still standing at the edge of everything. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't angry either. He was just watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between admiration and frustration and a dawning realization that his wife was not, and had never been the person he'd thought he married. Elena extricated herself from the crowd and walked toward him, still holding her trophy and winnings. "Satisfied?" Victor asked when she was close enough. "Very. You could have died, multiple times. But I didn't. Elena, I won, Victor. I won against some of the best drivers in this city, and I did it in front of hundreds of witnesses who will spend the next year talking about how Ghostline came back and reminded everyone why she was a legend." She held up the trophy. "This is who I am. This is what I'm good at, and I'm not going to bury it again just because it makes you uncomfortable." Victor stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and took the trophy from her hands, examining it with the same careful attention he gave everything else. "This is really important to you." "Yes." "More important than our marriage?" Elena met his eyes. "Our marriage was a business arrangement. We both know that. You wanted legitimacy and stability. I wanted protection and security. We gave each other exactly what we negotiated for. And now? Now I want more than security. I want to be seen, recognized, valued for what I can actually do instead of how I look standing next to you." She took back the trophy. "If you can't give me that, then we have a problem." Victor's jaw tightened. Around them, the crowd was starting to disperse, the tournament over, people heading back to their lives and their secrets. Jackie was organizing cleanup. Carlos and Sarah were comparing notes on their races. And Mason had already disappeared, probably to nurse his wounded ego somewhere private. "We need to talk," Victor said finally. "Really talk. Not in front of your racing friends or my business associates, but actually sit down and figure out what the hell we're doing." "Agreed. But not here. Not tonight. Tonight you won your tournament, and apparently that's a big deal in this world." He gestured toward the envelope of cash she was still holding. "Keep your winnings. Consider it my concession that I've been an idiot for 3 years. Elena blinked, surprised. "You're admitting you were wrong?" "I'm admitting I married a woman I never bothered to know. That's not wrong. It's..." He struggled for the word. "Wasteful. Stupid. Pick your adjective." "All of the above?" "Probably." Victor glanced toward where his car was parked. "I'm going home. Are you coming, or do you have more races to win tonight?" "I'm coming," Elena said. "But I'm driving myself, in my car, and you're going to follow me without trying to control the route or the speed." Victor looked like he wanted to argue. Then he seemed to think better of it. "Fine, but if you crash my Mercedes, we're having a different conversation." "Deal." They walked back to their respective cars, and Elena felt something shift between them. Not resolution exactly, but acknowledgement. The first real acknowledgement they'd had in 3 years of marriage that they were two separate people with separate needs instead of a unit designed for public consumption. Elena slid into the Mercedes, fired up the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot with Victor following in his town car. She drove the speed limit, obeyed all traffic signals, and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. She'd stolen her husband's car, revealed her secret identity, won a tournament that had restored her legend and announced to the entire underground that Ghostline was back. And somehow, impossibly, Victor hadn't killed her for any of it. The mansion appeared ahead, its gates opening automatically as she approached. Elena parked the Mercedes in what was left of the garage. Someone had already started repairs on the door she'd destroyed and waited for Victor to join her. They stood in the garage, surrounded by expensive cars and the smell of motor oil, and Elena realized this was the first time they'd ever just existed in the same space without performing for anyone. "I don't know what to do with you," Victor said finally, echoing his words from earlier. "You could start by talking to me like I have a brain." "I talk to you." "You talk at me. You issue instructions and expect compliance. That's not the same as conversation." Victor leaned against his Bugatti, the car that had started all of this chaos. "You're right. I've treated you like an employee instead of a partner. Or like a possession." "That too." He met her gaze. "In my defense, you never complained, never pushed back, never gave me any indication you were unhappy." "Would you have listened if I had?" The question hung between them, unanswerable and damning. Victor's expression shifted, something like shame flickering across his features before he locked it down. "Probably not," he admitted, "which makes me exactly the kind of man I swore I'd never become." Elena set her trophy down on the hood of a Ferrari. "What kind of man is that?" "The kind who's so focused on control that he forgets the people around him aren't chess pieces." Victor pushed away from the Bugatti. "My father was like that. Brilliant strategist, terrible husband. My mother left him when I was 12. Just walked out one day and never came back." Elena had known Victor's mother was gone, but she'd never heard the full story. He didn't talk about his childhood, didn't share the parts of himself that weren't useful for business or image. "I spent my whole life telling myself I'd be different," Victor continued, "that I'd build an empire but keep my family intact, that I'd marry someone and actually make it work." He laughed bitterly. "Instead, I married you and promptly ignored everything that made you interesting. You didn't know I was interesting. I should have looked, should have asked, should have cared enough to find out." He moved closer. "When I watched you race tonight, it was like seeing you for the first time. The focus, the skill, the absolute confidence in your abilities. That's not something people develop overnight." "I've been racing since I was 16, Elena said. "My father taught me to drive in his garage, said I had a gift for understanding machines." He was right. "I know." Elena picked up her trophy again, turning it in her hands. "For 3 years, I've pretended that part of me didn't exist. Buried it so deep I almost forgot it was there. And then last night, I heard you tell your friends I was boring, and something just broke." "I'm sorry," Victor said, "for what I said, for not seeing you, for all of it." The apology surprised her more than anything else that had happened tonight. Victor Caruso didn't apologize, didn't admit fault, didn't show weakness that could be exploited. But here he was, standing in their garage at 2 in the morning, telling his wife he'd been wrong. "Thank you," Elena said quietly. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of 3 years and 2 days pressing down on them both. "What happens now?" Victor asked. "I don't know. But I'm not going back to being invisible. I'm not going to stop racing, and I'm not going to pretend I'm less than I am just to make you comfortable. I wouldn't ask you to. You say that now. But what about next week when people start asking questions? When your associates wonder why your wife is racing in illegal tournaments, when it becomes a liability instead of just a surprise?" Victor considered this. "Then we make it an asset." Elena frowned. "What?" "You're a legend in the underground racing world. That's not a small thing. Those circuits move a lot of money, connect to a lot of people." His business mind was clearly working now, seeing angles and opportunities. "If you're Ghostline, publicly, that gives us access to spaces I could never reach through normal channels. I'm not using my racing to help your criminal enterprise. I'm not asking you to. I'm saying your racing doesn't have to be separate from my world. It can be parallel, complementary." Victor moved closer. "You built something legitimate, Elena. Something that doesn't depend on violence or intimidation. That's rare in my world. Valuable." Elena studied his face, trying to determine if this was genuine or just another form of control dressed up as support. "You're really okay with your wife being a street racer?" "I'm really okay with my wife being herself. However that manifests." He paused. "Though I'd appreciate it if you stopped stealing my cars without asking." Despite everything, Elena laughed. "I'll try to remember that." "Good." Victor glanced toward the house. "It's late. We should get some sleep." Separately? The question came out before Elena could stop it. They'd been sleeping in the same bed for 3 years, but it had always felt like sleeping in adjacent rooms, physically close, emotionally distant. Victor looked at her for a long moment. That's up to you. Elena picked up her trophy and her winnings and headed toward the house. At the door, she paused. Victor? Yes? Thank you for coming tonight, for watching, for not trying to stop me. Thank you for not making me chase you across the city in a high-speed pursuit. I don't think my town car would have kept up. She smiled. Definitely not. They went inside together, and for the first time in their marriage, it felt like they were actually moving in the same direction instead of just occupying the same space. Elena deposited her trophy in the library and her winnings in the safe in their bedroom. Victor watched her work the combination. Another secret she'd kept, knowing the safe code but never using it until now. You've known how to open that this whole time? He asked. Of course. I'm good with numbers and patterns. Took me about 2 weeks to figure it out after we got married. And you never took anything. I didn't need to. You gave me access to the household accounts. I just wanted to know I could if I had to. Elena closed the safe. Insurance policy. Smart. Victor loosened his tie, the first sign of relaxation she'd seen from him all night. What else don't I know about you? How much time do you have? Apparently more than I thought. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline from the races was wearing off, leaving her wrung out and shaky. I can rebuild a transmission in 6 hours. I speak Spanish fluently. I hate champagne, but I drink it at your parties because it's expected. I've read every book in your library, even though you probably think they're just decoration. And before I married you, I had a cat named Hendrix who died 3 months into our marriage. And I never told you because you'd made it clear you didn't want pets in the house. Victor stopped in the middle of removing his cufflinks. You had a cat? For 7 years. He was old when I married you. I knew he didn't have much time left. Elena felt the familiar ache of that loss. When he died, I buried him in the garden behind the greenhouse. There's a stone there with his name on it. I never knew. I know, that was the point. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I've spent 3 years knowing everything about you while you knew nothing about me. It was lonely. The mattress dipped as Victor sat beside her. I'm sorry. For the loneliness, for not paying attention, for making you feel like you had to bury yourself to survive being married to me. You didn't make me. I chose it. Elena turned her head to look at him. But I'm done choosing it now. Good. Victor lay back beside her, both of them staring at the ceiling like it might have answers. Tomorrow, everything changes. The word will be out about Ghostline. People will have questions. Let them ask. My associates won't like it, won't like that my wife has her own reputation, her own power base. Then your associates can adjust their expectations. Victor laughed quietly. You're going to be a problem for me, aren't you? Probably. Good, he said again. I've been bored for 3 years too. They lay in the darkness, not touching but not separate either, and Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not love. They were too broken for that, too much damage to undo with one conversation. But maybe the beginning of honesty. Maybe the start of actually knowing each other instead of just performing proximity. Outside, Chicago slept and dreamed and continued its usual chaos. And inside the Caruso mansion, a crime lord and a street racing legend lay side by side and tried to figure out what came next. Elena fell asleep still wearing her racing clothes, her hand curled around the Mercedes keys, ready to run at a moment's notice, even though for the first time in 3 years, she didn't think she'd need to. Morning arrived with sunlight and the smell of gasoline. Elena woke to find Victor's side of the bed empty and cold, which wasn't unusual except that today she actually noticed. She dressed in jeans and a t-shirt instead of the designer clothes hanging in her closet, pulled her hair into a ponytail, and went downstairs to find her husband in his study, surrounded by men who looked deeply unhappy. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Victor sat behind his desk, Marco and Anthony flanking him, while 3 other associates she recognized from various business dinners stood in various postures of agitation. On Victor's desk sat his tablet, displaying what looked like racing forum screenshots and news articles. Marco noticed her first. Mrs. Caruso, we're in the middle of a private meeting. It's fine, Victor said, gesturing for her to enter. This concerns her anyway. Elena stepped into the study, and every man in the room watched her with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed hostility. She'd seen these looks before at Victor's parties, but usually they were aimed at her as decoration. Now they were looking at her as something else entirely. "Gentlemen," Victor said, his voice carrying that edge of command that made people shut up and listen, "I believe you all know my wife, Elena. What you may not know is that she's also the street racer known as Ghostline." The room went silent. Anthony's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. The other associates exchanged glances that communicated variations on "what the fuck." "Ghostline," Marco repeated slowly, like he was testing the word. "The legendary racer who disappeared 5 years ago." "The same," Victor confirmed. "Your wife is an illegal street racer." This from Paolo Benedetti, one of Victor's older advisors. "And you're telling us this like it's good news?" "I'm telling you this because it's going to be public knowledge by noon today, and I'd rather you heard it from me than from the forums." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Elena won a major tournament last night, beat some of the best drivers in Chicago. There are videos circulating that clearly show her face. By the time the sun sets, every person in this city's underground will know that Mrs. Victor Caruso is Ghostline." Paolo's face reddened. "This is unacceptable. Your wife racing in illegal tournaments associating with criminals and lowlifes." "We are criminals and lowlifes," Elena interrupted quietly. "Or have you forgotten what business you're in?" The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Paolo stared at her like she'd just spoken in tongues. "Mrs. Caruso," he said tightly, "perhaps you should let the men handle this discussion." Elena smiled, sharp as broken glass. "Perhaps you should remember that I just beat 12 professional drivers in races that would have killed most people. I handle things just fine." Victor's expression was carefully neutral, but Elena caught the slight twitch of his lips that might have been amusement. "Elena has a point. We're not exactly in a position to judge her choice of recreational activities." "This isn't recreation," Marco cut in. "This is exposure, risk. Your wife's face is all over the underground forums associated with illegal racing. That connects you to that world publicly." "I was already connected to that world," Victor said. "Half the racing circuits in Chicago operate on my territory. The difference is now I have direct access instead of working through intermediaries." Anthony frowned. "You're saying this is strategic?" "I'm saying my wife has skills and connections I didn't know about until recently. I'd be an idiot not to see the potential value." "The potential value," Paolo repeated incredulously, "is vastly outweighed by the potential disaster. What happens when law enforcement decides to investigate these races and your wife's name comes up, when reporters start asking questions about Mrs. Caruso's extracurricular activities?" Elena had heard enough. She moved deeper into the study, and the men shifted instinctively to give her space. "Let me make something very clear. I've been racing since I was 16 years old. I've never been caught, never been arrested, never left evidence that could be traced back to me. I know how to be invisible when it matters." "You weren't very invisible last night," Paolo shot back. "Last night I chose not to be." "There's a difference." Elena met his gaze steadily. "For 3 years, I've been the perfect mafia wife. Silent, decorative, completely forgettable. I buried everything that made me useful because that's what this world expected. But I'm done with that now." "You don't get to decide." "Yes, I do." Elena's voice cut through his objection like a knife. "I'm not an employee. I'm not a subordinate. I'm Victor's wife, which means I have just as much standing in this organization as any of you. More, actually, since I can do things none of you can." Marco cleared his throat. "Mrs. Caruso, with respect, you're a racer. That's impressive, but it's not exactly relevant to our operations." Elena turned to Victor. "Show them." Victor nodded and pulled up a different file on his tablet. 3 months ago, we lost a shipment at the docks. 6 million in merchandise vanished. Our driver swore they followed protocol, took the approved route. But somewhere between the warehouse and the delivery point, the trucks got intercepted. "We know this," Anthony said impatiently. "We traced it to the Volkov organization. They had better intel than they should have." "They had better drivers," Elena corrected. "I looked at the route your trucks took. It's efficient for normal traffic, but it's terrible for evasion. Predictable turns, limited escape options, too many bottleneck points." She took Victor's tablet and pulled up a map. "If If your drivers knew how to actually drive instead of just following GPS, they could have taken this route. Her finger traced an alternative path through Chicago's streets. Shaves off 12 minutes, includes 4 different exit strategies, and uses roads that are too narrow for pursuit vehicles. The men stared at the map. Marco leaned closer, studying the route. That goes through residential areas, through spaces our trucks barely fit. Only if your drivers don't know how to handle their vehicles. A good driver can thread a semi through gaps that look impossible. Elena zoomed in on one particular intersection. This turn here looks like it can't be done at speed, but if you approach at 43 miles per hour and cut the angle just right, the truck's momentum carries you through without slowing down. I've done it. When? Paolo demanded. 5 years ago, running merchandise for a client who needed discretion. 3 trucks, $5 million in electronics, 0 law enforcement contact. Elena handed the tablet back to Victor. You're not just losing shipments because of bad intel. You're losing them because your drivers are adequate instead of excellent. Adequate gets intercepted. Excellent gets away. Silence fell over the study. Elena could see the men recalculating, reassessing, trying to fit this new version of her into their understanding of how the world worked. Victor stood up. Elena has offered to review all our transportation routes and driver protocols. Identify weaknesses, suggest improvements. Given her track record, I think that's an asset worth utilizing. You want to put your wife in charge of logistics? Paolo sounded like he was choking. I want to put someone with 20 years of driving experience and an unblemished record in charge of making sure we stop losing shipments. Victor's voice hardened. Unless you'd prefer to keep hemorrhaging money because your pride can't handle taking advice from a woman. Paolo's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. Anthony stepped forward. I have a question for Mrs. Caruso. Ask. The Volkov organization has been hitting our shipments with increasing frequency. They clearly have inside information about our routes and timing. If you were planning to intercept one of our trucks, how would you do it? Elena considered the question. This was a test, Anthony probing to see if she actually understood operational security, or if she was just good at driving fast. I'd compromise your GPS systems. Most commercial trucks use standard navigation software. It's easy to hack if you know what you're doing. Feed false data to your drivers about traffic or road conditions. Funnel them toward a specific location where your people are waiting. And how would you prevent that? Anthony asked. Analog backup. Teach your drivers to navigate without GPS. Give them paper maps, make them memorize routes, run random drills where technology fails, and they have to rely on skill. Elena met his gaze. And I'd vary the routes unpredictably. Never use the same path twice in a row. Never establish patterns that can be anticipated or exploited. Anthony nodded slowly. That would work? It has worked. It's what I did when I was running merchandise. Elena glanced at Victor. Your operation is sophisticated, but it's also predictable. You follow the same patterns because they're efficient. But efficiency is only valuable if you're not getting robbed blind. Marco spoke up. If we implement these changes, would you be willing to train our drivers? Show them what they're doing wrong. Elena had expected resistance, not cooperation. She glanced at Victor, who was watching this exchange with an expression that looked almost proud. Yes, I'd need access to your trucks and routes, and I'd need your drivers to actually listen instead of dismissing me because I'm a woman. They'll listen, Victor said flatly, or they'll find other employment. The meeting continued for another hour, with Elena answering increasingly technical questions about vehicle dynamics, pursuit evasion, and tactical driving. By the time the associates filed out, she'd gone from being an embarrassment they wanted hidden to an asset they wanted to exploit. It wasn't respect exactly, but it was recognition. She'd take it. When they were alone, Victor closed the study door and leaned against it. That went better than expected. They still think I'm crazy. They think you're useful. In our world, that's better than being liked. He moved back to his desk. Paolo will cause problems. He's old school, doesn't trust women in operational roles. Let him cause problems. I'll handle him. Victor smiled. I don't doubt it. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. We have another issue. What? Someone planted a bomb in my car. The armored Mercedes I use for high-risk meetings. He showed her the message from his security team. They found it during routine maintenance this morning. Professional job would have taken out the whole vehicle. Elena felt ice spread through her chest. Inside job? Has to be. The car's kept in a secure garage. Only my people have access. Victor's jaw tightened. Someone on my team is trying to kill me. Elena moved to his side, looking at the photo on his phone. The bomb was sophisticated. Multiple fail-safes designed to detonate under specific conditions. When were you supposed to use that car? Tonight. I have a meeting with the Santoro family about the dockyard expansion. High-stakes negotiations. He met her eyes. If the bomb hadn't been found, I'd be dead by midnight. Who knew about the meeting? Everyone at today's gathering. Marco, Anthony, Paolo, Benedetti, Torres. Victor ran a hand through his hair. Could be any of them. Could be someone further down the chain who got the information secondhand. Elena studied the bomb photo, her mind racing. The placement is specific. They wanted it to look like an accident, not an assassination, which means the traitor is someone who understands how these things get investigated. That doesn't narrow it down much. No, but it tells us they're sophisticated. This isn't some low-level enforcer trying to make a name for himself. Elena zoomed in on the bomb's trigger mechanism. This is someone with resources and connections, someone who could acquire military-grade explosives without raising flags. Victor's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression darkened further. Understood. Increase security on all family members. I want sweeps on every vehicle, every room. No exceptions. He hung up. They found 2 more devices. One in the study, one in our bedroom. The bedroom, where they'd slept last night, exhausted and vulnerable. Elena felt her hands curl into fists. Whoever's doing this wants you dead badly enough to risk planning multiple devices, she said. That's not just ambition. That's personal. Or it's business. Killing me opens up territory, creates opportunities. Victor walked to the window, staring out at the grounds. The question is whether this is internal rebellion or external attack made to look internal. Elena joined him at the window. The meeting tonight, are you still going? I have to. Canceling would show weakness, would let whoever's doing this know they've rattled me. They planted 3 bombs. You're already rattled. Which is why I can't show it. Victor turned to face her. This is how power works in my world. You acknowledge threats, but you don't let them control you. If I hide, I lose credibility. If I lose credibility, I lose everything. Elena understood the logic even as she hated it. In Victor's world, fear was a currency and perception was armor. Showing vulnerability meant inviting attack. Then we need to change the approach. You can't take the armored Mercedes, obviously. What's your backup? I have 3 other vehicles rated for high-threat situations, but if someone compromised one, they could have compromised all of them. Then don't use any of your regular vehicles. Elena met his eyes. Use me. Victor frowned. What? I drive you to the meeting. In a car nobody's expecting, taking a route nobody's planned for. Your security team can follow, but I'm the primary driver. Elena moved closer. Whoever planted those bombs is counting on you following protocol, using your regular vehicles, your regular routes, your regular security detail. They've planned for every standard response. And you're suggesting we throw out the playbook entirely. I'm suggesting you use an asset they don't know exists. Me. Elena held his gaze. I can get you to that meeting faster and safer than any of your regular drivers. I can avoid ambushes, evade pursuit, handle anything that comes at us on the road. That's what I do. Victor stared at her. You want to drive me into what's potentially a death trap. I want to keep you alive. There's a difference. Elena didn't blink. You said last night you were okay with me being myself. This is me being myself. I'm a driver. One of the best. Let me prove it when it actually matters. For a long moment, Victor said nothing. Elena could see him calculating odds, assessing risks, trying to determine if this was brilliant or insane. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but you follow my security protocols, encrypted communications, defensive driving procedures, immediate evacuation if things go wrong. Agreed, but I choose the route and the vehicle. Which vehicle? Elena smiled. The one nobody's touched. The one sitting in your garage with my fingerprints already all over it. Victor's eyes widened slightly. The Bugatti. You said it yourself. Whoever did this planned for standard responses. Nobody plans for the crime boss to show up to a high-stakes meeting in a $3 million supercar driven by his wife, who's secretly a legendary street racer. Elena moved toward the door. I need to prep the car. Check every system. Make sure nothing's been tampered with since I drove it. Elena. Victor's voice stopped her. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, I need you to know that I'm trusting you with more than just my life. I'm trusting you with my entire operation. If I die tonight, there's a succession plan, but it's messy, violent. A lot of people will suffer. Elena looked back at him. Then I guess I'd better not let you die. She spent the next 6 hours going over the Bugatti with a precision that bordered on obsessive. Checked every fluid, every wire, every component that could be compromised or sabotaged. She pulled the seats, examined the undercarriage, ran diagnostics on the computer systems. By the time she was satisfied the car was clean, her hands were covered in grease and her back ached from crawling around the garage floor. Marco found her under the chassis, examining the suspension. Mrs. Caruso, Victor wants you upstairs to coordinate security protocols. Elena slid out from under the car. Tell him I'll be there in 20 minutes. I'm almost done here. Marco hesitated. You're really going to drive him tonight? Yes. This is insane. You're not trained for protective operations. You're a racer. And racing is 90% threat assessment and 10% execution. I know how to read a road, identify ambush points, calculate escape routes. Elena stood, wiping her hands on a rag. Your regular drivers know how to follow instructions. I know how to improvise when instructions get you killed. You're also a visible target. Everyone in the underground knows Ghostline now. If someone wants to get to Victor through you, then they'll have to catch me first. Elena met his eyes. I've been running from threats since I was 16, Marco. I'm still here. So are you going to help me keep Victor alive, or are you going to keep questioning whether I'm qualified? Marco studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and showed her a tactical map. Potential ambush points on every route between here and the Santoro estate. We've identified 7 high-risk locations. Elena examined the map. You're missing 2, here and here, she pointed. Narrow roads, limited visibility, easy to block off. If I were planning an ambush, I'd use one of these spots. And how would you avoid them? I wouldn't use any of these routes. Elena pulled up a different map on her phone, the same one she'd shown Victor's associates earlier. This path adds 10 minutes, but eliminates choke points, keeps us mobile, keeps our options open. Marco studied her route. This goes through residential neighborhoods. The Bugatti will draw attention. Less attention than a convoy of armored vehicles. And attention isn't the same as threat. Elena pocketed her phone. I'll be upstairs in 15 minutes. Make sure your team knows I'm primary driver and their backup. If something happens, they support my decisions, not override them. Victor's people won't like taking orders from you. Then Victor's people can explain to him why they let their egos get him killed. Elena finished her inspection, cleaned up, and went upstairs to find Victor in the bedroom changing into a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. She'd showered and changed into dark jeans, a black shirt, and a leather jacket that would allow freedom of movement if things went wrong. Victor glanced at her outfit. You're not wearing a dress? I'm driving, not decorating. This is practical. Elena checked the gun she'd retrieved from her old lockbox in the garage, a Glock 19 she'd bought years ago and never had reason to use. Until now. I'm armed, are you? Always. Victor adjusted his tie. Marco briefed me on your route. It's unconventional. Unconventional keeps you breathing. Let's hope so. He turned to face her fully. If this goes wrong, if there's an attack, your priority is getting yourself out, not me. You understand? Elena finished checking her weapon and met his eyes. No. Elena, my priority is keeping both of us alive. If that's not acceptable, find another driver. She holstered the gun. I'm not sacrificing myself, but I'm also not abandoning you. We get through this together or not at all? Victor looked like he wanted to argue. Then he seemed to remember who he was talking to and nodded. Together then. But they went downstairs to find Marco and Anthony waiting with 4 security personnel. The team looked skeptical when they saw Elena heading for the Bugatti, but nobody voiced objections. Victor had made it clear she was in charge of transportation, And in his organization, what Victor said was law. Elena slid into the driver's seat, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders. This was different from racing. Racing was about being faster than your opponent. This was about keeping someone alive while people actively tried to kill him. The pressure should have terrified her. Instead, she felt focused, sharp, ready. Victor got into the passenger seat, and the security convoy arranged themselves in two vehicles, one ahead, one behind. Elena started the Bugatti's engine, feeling its power vibrate through the steering wheel. "Ready?" Victor asked. Elena shifted into gear. "Let's find out who wants you dead." She pulled out of the garage and into the Chicago night, where somewhere in the darkness, someone was waiting to kill her husband. Elena pressed the accelerator and felt the Bugatti respond like it understood the stakes. Tonight wouldn't be about speed, it would be about survival. And Elena had spent her entire life learning how to survive. The city unfolded before them in neon and shadow, and Elena drove with the kind of focused calm that came from knowing lives depended on her decisions. The Bugatti moved through Chicago's streets like liquid darkness, fast enough to outrun trouble, but controlled enough to avoid creating it. Behind them, Marco's vehicle maintained a careful distance while the second security car ran parallel 2 blocks over, creating a protective net that was more suggestion than certainty. Victor sat beside her, his phone displaying a live feed from both security vehicles and updates from his team at the Santoro estate. He'd been silent since they left the mansion, watching her drive with an intensity that should have been unnerving but somehow wasn't. "You're different behind the wheel," he said finally. Elena shifted gears, threading through traffic that was clearing as evening deepened. "How so?" "Calmer, more centered, like this is where you actually exist." He glanced at her. "The woman at my parties is performing. This version is real. This version has always been real. You just never looked for her." Victor absorbed that without argument. "I'm looking now." Elena took the turn onto West Monroe, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. "What do you see?" "Someone who's been invisible by choice, not inability. Someone who could have left me at any point but chose to stay." He paused. "Why did you stay, Elena? You had money from racing, had skills that could have taken you anywhere. Why stay married to a man who treated you like furniture?" The question hung between them, weighted with 3 years of silence and resentment. Elena had asked herself the same thing countless times, usually at 3 a.m. while Victor slept beside her like a stranger. "Because leaving would have meant admitting I made a mistake," she said finally. "And I don't like admitting mistakes, so I convinced myself I could make it work, could be enough of what you needed that eventually you'd see me as more than decoration. That's not a good reason to stay in a marriage." "No, but it's an honest one." Elena accelerated through a yellow light, watching the mirrors for tail vehicles. "Nothing yet." "What about you? Why did you marry me?" Victor was quiet for a moment. "Because you were different from every other woman in my world. You didn't want my power or my money. Didn't try to manipulate me or position yourself for advantage. You were just yourself. Competent, independent, self-sufficient." He laughed without humor. "And then I spent 3 years trying to turn you into everyone else. Make you decorative and silent because that felt safer than having a wife who didn't need me." "I never said I didn't need you." "You didn't have to. It was obvious." Victor gestured at the city around them. "You could have survived without me. Built a life, made a name for yourself. Instead, you buried everything that made you dangerous and pretended to be harmless." "Because dangerous women don't survive in your world, Victor. They get eliminated or controlled or used up." Elena took the turn onto Franklin, her route deliberately avoiding the main thoroughfares Marco's team had flagged as high risk. "I made myself small to stay alive. That's not weakness, that's strategy." "I know. I just wish I'd recognized it sooner." They drove in silence for several blocks. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Marco. All clear on his end, no signs of pursuit or ambush. The second security vehicle reported the same. Too clean, too easy. Someone planning to kill Victor wouldn't just plant bombs and hope for the best. They'd have contingencies, backup plans, ways to salvage the operation if the primary method failed, which meant the real threat was still ahead. Elena took a route that serpentined through neighborhoods where the buildings pressed close and the streets narrowed to the width of careful planning. The Bugatti's bulk barely fit, but she'd driven tighter spaces during races, knew how to use mirrors and instinct instead of clearance and comfort. "This isn't the route we discussed," Victor observed. "No, I changed it 20 minutes ago." Elena's eyes never stopped moving, cataloging every parked car, every alley, every potential firing position. If someone's monitoring your security frequencies, they heard the original plan. This one exists only in my head. What if we get separated from the security team? Then we're harder to track and faster to move. 2 vehicles are easier to hide than 4. Elena downshifted, taking a corner that made the tires whisper against asphalt. "Trust me." Victor settled back in his seat. "I do." Which is terrifying, considering I've known you for 3 years and apparently understood nothing. "You understood enough. You just prioritized wrong." Elena glanced at him. "You wanted a partner who'd make you look powerful. What you needed was a partner who'd make you actually powerful. There's a difference. And now? Now we figure out which one I'm going to be." The Santoro estate appeared ahead, a fortress of old money and older violence sitting behind iron gates and strategic landscaping. Elena slowed, giving the security team time to catch up while she assessed the approach. 2 entry points, both monitored, high walls, limited visibility into the grounds, multiple positions for snipers or ambush. If someone wanted Victor dead, this would be the perfect place to make it happen. Marco's voice crackled through the encrypted radio. "Mrs. Caruso, we should approach together. Protocol dictates." "Protocol gets people killed," Elena interrupted. "I'm going in alone. You maintain perimeter security and watch for external threats." "Absolutely not. Victor's safety requires—" "Marco." Victor's voice cut through the argument. "Follow her instructions." Silence. Then, reluctantly, "Understood." Elena pulled up to the gates, and Victor rolled down his window to speak with the guard. The man recognized him immediately, verified his identity through 3 separate systems, and waved them through. The gates opened, and Elena drove into what felt increasingly like a trap. The estate's driveway curved through manicured grounds toward a main house that looked like it had been stolen from a European villa and reassembled in Illinois. Expensive, imposing, designed to remind visitors that the Santoro family had been powerful when Victor's grandfather was still running numbers in Brooklyn. Elena parked near the front entrance, positioning the Bugatti for quick departure if necessary. She'd memorized the estate's layout from satellite images Marco had provided, knew where the exits were, where the sight lines opened up, where someone with a rifle could post up and control the kill zone. "Stay close to me," she told Victor as they exited the car. "If something happens, we move for the vehicle. No heroics, no standing your ground. We survive first, maintain dignity second." Victor's lips twitched. "You're enjoying this." "I'm terrified. But terror with a plan beats confidence with stupidity." Elena adjusted her jacket, feeling the weight of the Glock against her ribs. "Let's get this over with." They walked towards the entrance together, and Elena felt every instinct she'd developed over 2 decades of surviving dangerous situations wake up screaming. Something was wrong. Not obviously wrong, not anything she could point to and identify, but wrong in the way shadows fell and air pressure shifted before a storm. The front door opened before they reached it. Roberto Santoro stood in the entrance, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of smile that meant absolutely nothing. Behind him, his son Michael and 3 associates arranged themselves in a formation that tried to look casual and failed. "Victor," Roberto said warmly, extending his hand, "thank you for coming. And Mrs. Caruso, what a pleasant surprise. I wasn't expecting you to join us tonight." Elena shook his hand, noting the strength in his grip and the calculation in his eyes. "My husband and I are rarely separated these days." "How lovely. Please come in. We have much to discuss." They entered the estate, and Elena's unease deepened. The house was too quiet, too empty for a meeting of this importance. Where were the other families who should be present for dockyard negotiations? Where were the associates and advisors who usually swarmed these gatherings? Victor noticed too. She saw it in the slight tension of his shoulders, the way his right hand drifted closer to where she knew he kept a weapon. But he smiled and made small talk with Roberto as they walked through corridors lined with art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. They reached a sitting room where drinks had been laid out, and chairs arranged in a configuration that was definitely not designed for business negotiations. Michael Santoro closed the door behind them, and Elena heard the lock click into place. Roberto gestured to the chairs. "Please sit. Can I offer you something to drink?" "No, thank you," Victor said, remaining standing. "I was under the impression this meeting would include representatives from the other families. Discuss terms for the dockyard expansion." "Plans change." Roberto moved to pour himself a scotch, his back to them. "Sometimes opportunities arise that require more intimate discussions." Elena's hand moved inside her jacket, fingers finding the Glock's grip. Beside her, Victor had gone absolutely still, the way predators did before they struck. "What opportunity would that be?" Victor asked, his voice pleasant and deadly. Roberto turned, glass in hand, and smiled. "The opportunity to restructure Chicago's power dynamics without the complications of your continued existence." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Victor's expression didn't change, but Elena felt the shift in his energy, from wariness to certainty, from defense to attack. "You planted the bombs," Victor said. "Not personally, but yes, the explosives were my contribution to solving a problem that's become increasingly inconvenient." Roberto took a sip of his scotch. "You've been expanding too aggressively, Victor, taking territory that isn't yours, making deals that undermine established arrangements. The old families have decided it's time for new leadership. By assassination rather than negotiation. Negotiation requires both parties to have leverage. You have none." Roberto set down his glass. "The bombs were supposed to eliminate you quietly. An accident, tragic but not suspicious. When that failed, I decided directness had merit. Michael and the three associates produced weapons, handguns that had been concealed but were now very much visible. Elena did the same, her Glock appearing in her hand with the kind of smooth economy that came from training she'd done years ago and never forgotten. 4 guns on them, 2 guns pointed back. The mathematics were not encouraging. "You're outnumbered," Roberto observed, "and outmaneuvered. My people control the grounds. Your security team is currently being dealt with by associates who are significantly better armed and prepared." He smiled. "This was always going to end one way, Victor. The only question was whether you'd die quickly or slowly." Victor's gun never wavered. "You're assuming my wife is just decorative, that she's here to look pretty while the men handle business." "Isn't she?" Roberto glanced at Elena dismissively. "A woman with a gun is still just a woman." Elena smiled, cold and sharp. "You clearly don't know who I am." "I know your Ghostline, the racer. Very impressive, I'm sure, but irrelevant to—" Elena shot the light fixture directly above Roberto's head. The room plunged into darkness, punctuated by muzzle flashes and shouting. Elena grabbed Victor's arm and pulled him sideways as bullets chewed through the space where they'd been standing. She'd memorized the room's layout during their entry, knew where the furniture was, where the door was, where the windows opened onto the grounds. "Window!" she hissed at Victor. 3 steps forward, 2 left. They moved together in the darkness, Elena's free hand on Victor's back to guide him. Behind them, Roberto was screaming orders, and Michael was trying to find the light switch. Someone fired blindly, the bullet punching through expensive wallpaper and probably priceless art. Elena hit the window at a run, her shoulder connecting with glass that shattered outward in a spray of glittering destruction. She went through first, landing in a crouch on grass that was probably maintained by a team of gardeners who were about to have a very bad day. Victor followed, his suit tearing on remaining glass shards but his weapon still in hand. Gunfire erupted from the house. Elena returned fire twice, not aiming to kill but to discourage pursuit, then grabbed Victor's hand and ran for the Bugatti. The grounds erupted with activity. Men appeared from various positions, all armed, all moving to intercept. Elena counted 7, maybe 8, all between them in escape. Behind them, Roberto and his people were recovering, would be through the window in seconds. "Can you get to the car?" Victor asked, breathing hard. "Not without going through them." "Then we go through them." They ran, and Elena's world narrowed to pure survival instinct. She fired at the closest attacker, saw him drop, shifted aim to the second. Victor took out a third with 2 shots that demonstrated he'd been understating his marksmanship skills. They were moving, shooting, closing the distance to the Bugatti while bullets chewed up landscaping around them. Elena's magazine ran dry. She ejected it without breaking stride, slammed in her spare, and kept firing. Beside her, Victor was doing the same, their movements synchronized in a way that spoke to shared desperation rather than trained coordination. They reached the Bugatti, with 3 attackers still standing and more pouring from the house. Elena threw herself into the driver's seat while Victor dove into the passenger side. She fired up the engine as bullets starred the windshield, bulletproof glass, thank whatever deity watched over criminal wives who married men with enemies. "Hold on," Elena said, and slammed the accelerator to the floor. The Bugatti launched forward with enough force to shove them back in their seats. Elena aimed directly at 2 men who were running to block the driveway, and at the last second they threw themselves aside rather than test whether flesh could stop $3 million of carbon fiber and rage. The estate gates were closed. Elena didn't slow down. "Elena," Victor started. "Trust me." She hit the gates doing 60. The impact was catastrophic. Metal shrieking, the Bugatti's front end crumpling, airbags deploying in clouds of white that obscured everything. But momentum and engineering and sheer violent physics carried them through. The gates exploded outward, and the Bugatti burst onto the street in a spray of debris and fury. Elena fought the wheel, the car listing to one side from the impact damage, the steering pulling hard right. Behind them, vehicles were already mobilizing from the estate, pursuit beginning before they'd made it 2 blocks. "Status?" Elena snapped at Victor while wrestling with the damaged steering. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, probably from glass, but otherwise seemed functional. "Alive, angry? Your status?" "Same." She yanked the wheel left, taking a turn that made the Bugatti scream in mechanical agony. "Call Marco. Tell him we're heading north on Ashland and we have multiple pursuit vehicles." Victor was already on his phone, his voice clipped and urgent. "Marco? We're compromised and under pursuit. Santoro was the traitor. He has at least 10 men on us. We need immediate extraction or support. Current location." He looked at Elena. "Ashland and Division, heading north, heavily damaged vehicle." Elena checked the mirrors, 3 cars behind them, closing fast. The Bugatti was hurt, but not dead. Still faster than anything pursuing them, but losing speed with each second. "We won't make it back to the mansion. This car's dying. Marco says there's a safe house on Fullerton. Can we make it?" Elena calculated distances, speeds, the Bugatti's remaining capability. "Maybe. If I can lose some of these followers first." She took the next turn without signaling, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic and through a red light that nearly caused 3 separate accidents. Horns blared, brakes screamed, the pursuit vehicles followed, and Elena realized these weren't just thugs with guns. These were professional drivers, people who knew how to chase, how to anticipate, how to force their target into mistakes. Fortunately, Elena knew how to not make mistakes. She threaded the dying Bugatti through traffic that was getting heavier as they approached downtown, used the car's remaining speed to slip through gaps that closed behind her, forcing the pursuit to navigate obstacles she'd already passed. One by one, the trailing vehicles fell back, blocked by traffic or unable to match her precision. But 2 remained, professional, persistent, getting closer as the Bugatti's damaged systems began failing in earnest. "They're going to ram us," Victor said, watching the mirrors. "Not if I ram them first." Elena waited for the closest pursuit vehicle to pull alongside, then yanked the wheel hard right. The Bugatti's damaged front end connected with the other car's door, metal shrieking, both vehicles sparking and grinding. The other driver tried to recover, but Elena had physics on her side. She pushed harder, forcing them toward parked cars, waiting for the exact right moment. Then she braked. The pursuit vehicle shot forward, unable to stop in time, and crashed into a parked delivery truck with a sound like the world ending. The impact sent it spinning across the intersection, blocking traffic and eliminating 1 threat. 1 left. The final pursuit vehicle pulled alongside on Victor's side, and Elena saw the passenger window rolling down, saw the weapon emerging. She had maybe 3 seconds before they opened fire at point-blank range into a car whose bulletproof glass had already been compromised by earlier impacts. "Down!" she screamed at Victor and simultaneously yanked the emergency brake while cutting the wheel hard left. The Bugatti went into a controlled spin, momentum carrying it in a tight circle that physics said shouldn't be possible, and Elena made happen anyway through sheer skill and desperation. The world blurred into streaks of light and motion. They completed a full 180, and suddenly the pursuit vehicle was behind them instead of beside them. Elena released the brake, straightened the wheel, and accelerated back the way they'd come, leaving the final pursuer scrambling to reverse course. "Safe house," she gasped. "Directions! Now!" Victor, pale and gripping the door handle hard enough to leave impressions, rattled off turns and street names. Elena followed them on instinct and memory, the Bugatti coughing and shuddering beneath her, but still moving, still fighting. They reached Fullerton and found the safe house, a nondescript building that could have been anything from a storage facility to a failed restaurant. Elena parked the Bugatti in the rear loading zone, and the engine died immediately, giving up its last breath in a cloud of steam and the smell of burning oil. They sat in the dead car for 5 seconds, breathing hard, covered in glass dust and blood and the residue of violence. "That," Victor said finally, "was the most terrifying experience of my life. That was a Tuesday for me 5 years ago." Elena's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Except usually I was getting paid better and nobody was actively trying to kill me." Victor laughed, genuine, startled laughter that acknowledged the absolute insanity of what had just happened. "You saved my life. We saved each other's lives. You took out 3 of Santoro's men. You drove through a gate, lost half our pursuers, and executed a handbrake turn that probably violated several laws of physics." He looked at her with something that might have been awe. "You're not just good, Elena. You're extraordinary." Marco's voice crackled through Victor's phone. "Boss? Elena, status?" "Alive," Victor said. "Damaged but functional. The Santoro family attempted a coordinated assassination. Roberto was the traitor." Silence. Then Marco's voice, hard as stone. "Orders?" Victor looked at Elena. She looked back, and something passed between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement that everything had changed and there was no going back. "Eliminate the threat," Victor said. "Roberto, Michael, every associate who participated. I want them gone by morning." He paused. "And Marco?" "Elena gets full operational authority over transportation and logistics. Anyone who questions it answers to me personally." "Understood. We're en route to your position. Sit tight." They sat in the destroyed Bugatti, waiting for rescue, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose. Recognition. The certainty that she'd just proven herself in the most fundamental way possible. "I'm sorry about your car," she said, looking at the shattered windshield and crumpled hood. Victor glanced around the wreckage and shrugged. "It's just a car. You, on the other hand, are irreplaceable." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond tonight's violence. 3 years, Elena said quietly. "We've been married for 3 years, and this is the first time you've looked at me like I matter. That's because this is the first time I've actually seen you." Victor reached across the destroyed center console and took her hand. "I'm sorry. For dismissing you, for ignoring you, for making you bury yourself to survive being married to me. You deserved better." "Yes, I did." Elena squeezed his hand. "But we're past deserving now. We're into earned, and tonight we earned each other's respect." "Is respect enough?" Elena considered the question. 3 years ago, she would have said no, would have wanted love, partnership, the fairy tale version of marriage that existed in movies and novels. But she'd learned a lot in 3 years about what actually sustained relationships in a world built on violence and power. "Respect is everything," she said. "Love can be faked. Passion fades. But respect? Respect has to be earned, maintained, defended. It's the foundation. Everything else is decoration." Victor nodded slowly. "Then we build from respect and see what else develops." Agreed. Marco arrived 10 minutes later with 3 vehicles and 8 heavily armed men who looked ready to wage war. He took one look at the destroyed Bugatti and whistled low. "Mrs. Caruso, you are not exaggerating about your driving skills." Elena climbed out of the wreckage, her legs unsteady, but her voice firm. "How many casualties on our side?" 2 wounded during the initial ambush at the perimeter. None dead. The Santoro forces weren't expecting resistance. Marco's expression hardened. "They are now." The ride back to the mansion was silent, both Elena and Victor processing what had happened and what came next. By the time they arrived, word had already spread through Chicago's underground. Victor Caruso had survived an assassination attempt, and his wife had driven them both through hell to safety. The next week was chaos incarnate. Roberto Santoro and his son Michael were found dead in their estate, killed during what authorities classified as a home invasion. The old families who'd supported the coup attempt quietly distanced themselves, suddenly very interested in demonstrating loyalty to Victor's organization. Elena took control of transportation and logistics, implementing changes that made the operation 30% more efficient and 70% harder to infiltrate. She trained drivers who'd spent years thinking they were professionals and showed them what mastery actually looked like. Some resented her. Most learned quickly that resentment didn't matter when she was right. The racing community exploded with speculation about Ghostline's involvement in mob activities. Jackie called 3 times before Elena answered and confirmed that yes, she'd been involved in the incident everyone was talking about, and no, she wasn't giving details. "You're a legend twice over now," Jackie said. "The racer who never lost and the wife who drove her crime boss husband through an assassination attempt and survived." "I'm just someone who's good at driving and tired of being invisible," Elena replied. "Well, invisible you are not. When are you racing again?" Elena looked at her calendar, at the schedule she'd built that included driver training, route optimization, and actual time with her husband. "Next month. I need to make sure Victor's organization doesn't fall apart first." "Fair enough, but don't make us wait too long. The circuit needs Ghostline." 3 months later, Elena stood on a podium at Chicago's largest underground racing tournament, holding a trophy that declared her champion for the 3rd time. Beside her, Victor watched from the crowd, not hiding his presence, not pretending his wife was anyone other than exactly who she was. That night, at the mansion, they sat in the study where everything had started to unravel and began to actually know each other. "Tell me about your father," Victor said. "The mechanic. The man who taught you to drive." Elena pulled out her phone and showed him photos she'd kept hidden for 3 years. A small Mexican man with grease-stained hands and a smile that could light rooms. A garage in an industrial district where young Elena learned that machines made more sense than people. "He died when I was 23, she said. "Left me the garage and enough debt to bury it twice over. Racing was how I survived. Building custom cars was how I thrived." Victor studied the photos. "He'd be proud of you." "Maybe. Or maybe he'd be horrified that I married into organized crime." Elena took back the phone. "What about your mother, the one who left?" For the first time since she'd known him, Victor talked about the woman who'd walked out of his life when he was 12. About the strength it took to leave a powerful man. About the hole it left that he'd spent decades trying to fill with control and power and wives who wouldn't abandon him. "I made you small because I was afraid you'd leave like she did," he admitted. "If you had no power, no independence, you'd have to stay." "But that's not love, Victor. That's captivity." "I know. I'm learning." He met her eyes. "Slowly, but I'm learning." They talked until dawn, sharing histories and truths that 3 years of marriage had never uncovered. It wasn't romance. It wasn't the dramatic reconciliation of Hollywood movies. It was 2 people who'd survived something terrible together and were trying to figure out if survival could become partnership. 6 months after the assassination attempt, Elena was named head of logistics for the Caruso organization. The announcement came at a meeting of Chicago's crime families, and every man in the room heard it and understood what it meant. Victor Caruso's wife wasn't decoration anymore. She was a power in her own right. Some of the old guard grumbled. Most accepted reality. A few made the mistake of testing her authority and learned very quickly that Elena didn't need Victor's protection to handle threats. 1 year after that night at the Santoro estate, Elena sat in the driver's seat of a new car. Not a Bugatti this time, but a custom-built race car that she'd designed and built herself in the garage that had been her father's and was now hers again, purchased back with money she'd earned through legitimate means and racing victories. Victor stood beside the car, watching her adjust systems and check specifications. "You're going to win tonight." "Obviously," Elena grinned up at him. "The question is by how much?" "The underground is betting 12 seconds. Tell them to bet 20. She did win by 18 seconds, and when she stepped out of the car to cheering crowds and flashing cameras, Victor was there to hand her the trophy. Not as her handler, not as her owner, as her partner in a marriage that had finally, painfully become something real. They went home together, to a mansion that had stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like a base of operations. In the study where Elena had once confessed to stealing his car, they sat together and planned the future. The old families are getting restless again, Victor said, reviewing reports. They think the dockyard expansion is too aggressive. Then prove them wrong with numbers instead of violence. Elena pulled up logistics data on her tablet. If we optimize the shipping routes like I suggested, we can increase efficiency by 40%. That's enough profit to make aggression unnecessary. Victor studied her proposal. This would require trusting you with complete operational control over transportation. Yes, it would. Elena met his eyes. Can you do that? 3 years ago, the answer would have been no. Victor would have seen partnership as weakness, trust as liability. But 3 years ago, his wife had been a beautiful secret he'd never bothered to discover. Yes, he said, I can do that. They implemented Elena's changes. The organization thrived. The racing circuit celebrated Ghostline's continued dominance. And slowly, carefully, the crime lord and the street racer built something that looked less like a business arrangement and more like actual marriage. It wasn't perfect. They still fought, still struggled with power dynamics and trust issues that 3 years of pretending couldn't erase overnight. But they fought as equals now, and they solved problems as partners. 2 years after Elena drove them both through hell to safety, she stood in the garage working on a customer's car because she'd reopened her father's business on the side, building custom machines for people who appreciated artistry, and Victor appeared in the doorway. I have a question, he said. Elena didn't look up from the engine she was rebuilding. Ask. If you could go back 3 years, knowing everything that would happen, would you still marry me? Elena set down her wrench and considered the question honestly. 3 years of being invisible, 1 night of stealing a car and reclaiming herself, an assassination attempt that almost killed them both, months of rebuilding trust and learning to be partners instead of strangers sharing a name. Yes, she said finally, because the woman I am now wouldn't exist without surviving the woman I had to be for you. I don't like what we were, but I value what we became. Victor moved into the garage, careful not to disturb her tools. I love you. It was the first time he'd said it. The first time either of them had said it, actually, in a marriage that had begun as transaction and evolved into something neither of them had planned. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, the way she'd learned to look at engines to understand their hidden mechanisms. I know. I love you too, but more importantly, I respect you, and you respect me. That's rarer. It is. Victor glanced at the car she was working on. Whose is this? Jackie Chen's. She wants a custom build for an exhibition race next month. Are you racing? Of course, I'm Ghostline. I always race. Victor smiled. The real smile that she'd learned meant he was genuinely happy instead of performing happiness. Good. I'll be there watching. You always are now. He kissed her then, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and possibility, and Elena kissed him back. Not because she had to, not because it was expected, but because she wanted to. Because somewhere in the chaos of stolen cars and assassination attempts and forced evolution, they'd found each other. That night, they attended a gala together. Elena wore a gown that cost a fortune and felt like armor. Victor introduced her to associates not as his wife, but as his partner in business and life. When someone asked about her racing, he bragged about her victories with genuine pride. The underground still whispered about Ghostline. The organization still relied on Elena's expertise to keep operations running smoothly. And the mansion that had once felt like a beautiful prison now felt like home. Years later, when people asked how they made it work, how a street racer and a crime lord built a marriage that actually functioned, Elena would smile and say it was simple. We stopped performing for each other and started being ourselves. The rest was just details. Victor would add, and we learned that the most dangerous woman in Chicago wasn't a liability. She was the advantage I'd been too stupid to recognize. But together, they ruled an empire built on respect instead of fear, on partnership instead of possession. And every so often, late at night when the city slept, Elena would slip into the garage, fire up whatever machine she was building, and drive into the darkness. Sometimes Victor joined her. Sometimes he watched from windows, his wife disappearing into neon and shadow, confident she'd always come back. Because that was the thing about Ghostline. She'd spent 3 years buried and silent, and she had no intention of ever being invisible again. The trophy had become the driver. The Empire had learned to keep up. And Elena Vale, once silent and dismissed, now sat beside her husband as an equal while the world learned what happened when you underestimated the quiet woman in the corner. She became the most dangerous person in the room, and she never apologized for it again.